I have prepared more than 100 very unusual historical photos. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? In 1992, a South Florida woman took a bath in a salvaged tub surrounded by homes torn apart by Hurricane Andrew. The storm struck with Category 5 winds, destroying more than 25,000 houses and leaving entire neighborhoods without power, water, or shelter across southern Florida. On July 19, 1940, more than 33,000 people gathered in Alton, Illinois, for the funeral of Robert Wadlow, the tallest person ever recorded at 8 feet 11 inches. His 10-foot 9-inch casket weighed over 1,000 pounds and required 12 pallbearers and 8 assistants to carry it to his grave. On May 1, 1945, a Pravda correspondent photographed Berlin's shattered Reichstag from a Soviet P-02 aircraft as smoke still rose across the city below. The image captured collapse of Hitler's regime just days before Germany's surrender ended the war in Europe after nearly 6 years. Between 1983 and 1985, Ethiopia suffered its worst famine in a century, leaving at least 300,000 people dead, millions displaced, and nearly 200,000 children orphaned. Drought triggered the crisis, but war, forced resettlement, and policies of the communist Derg regime made it far worse. In 1983, 61-year-old potato farmer Cliff Young entered Australia's grueling Sydney to Melbourne ultramarathon in work boots against elite runners. Unaware that competitors usually slept, he kept moving through the nights and won by nearly 10 hours, becoming a national legend. On July 17, 1918, the RMS Carpathia, famous for rescuing Titanic survivors, was struck by 3 torpedoes from the German submarine U-55 off Ireland. Of the 223 people aboard, 218 survived, while the ship that had saved hundreds 6 years earlier sank beneath the Atlantic. Around 1915, an endurance crewman embraced one of the expedition's sled dogs on the Antarctic ice as Frank Hurley took the photograph. Hurley saved only 120 glass negatives after Shackleton ordered hundreds destroyed to lighten the lifeboats, preserving the expedition's visual history. In 1968, American soldiers in Vietnam posed with a California state flag and a Confederate battle flag outside their camp. The casual photograph reflects how troops carried regional identities, personal symbols, and fragments of home into a war fought thousands of miles away. In 1899, a barefoot girl in an East London slum held a younger child while sitting on a rough wooden bench. Their worn clothing and solemn expressions reveal the poverty faced by many working-class families in overcrowded Victorian neighborhoods where hunger and illness were common. On May 2, 1945, Soviet photographer Yevgeny Khalday staged the raising of the red flag over Berlin's Reichstag. Before publication, editors removed a second wristwatch from one soldier and added darker smoke, turning the scene into one of the war's most carefully constructed images. In 1913, Lottie and Charles Peets posed with their children in Lawton, Oklahoma, for a carefully arranged studio portrait. Their elegant clothing and calm expressions reflect the dignity black families claimed during an era still shaped by segregation and widespread racial discrimination. In 1989, actor and comedian Martin Short shared a playful moment with his daughter Catherine Elizabeth in their backyard. Far from the stage and cameras, the candid photograph captures the warm family life he guarded closely while his career in film and television continued to grow. In the late 1950s, a teenage Jimi Hendrix posed in Seattle with an early electric guitar as his obsession with music began to take shape. Though often dated to 1957, biographies place his first electric guitar, a white Supro Ozark bought by his father in 1959 after years of practice. On July 19, 1944, German prisoners captured during Operation Goodwood stood under British guard in Normandy, their exhausted faces marked by days of fighting. The offensive gained ground east of Caen, but failed to achieve a decisive armored breakthrough Allied commanders had hoped for. From 1976 to 2003, Concorde carried passengers across the Atlantic at more than twice the speed of sound, cutting New York to London to just over 3 hours. Flying near Mach 2 at about 60,000 feet, it became the fastest and most glamorous passenger jet ever placed in regular service. In 1968, a U.S. Marine paused for a cigarette during Operation Meade River in Vietnam. Ammunition belts wrapped across his chest and "Cannonball" written on his helmet. The muddy scene captures the brief raw moments of rest soldiers took between patrols and combat in the Mekong Delta. In 1932, Adolf Hitler paused during an election campaign stop in Stettin, wiping his face as supporters and uniformed party members gathered around him. That year, the Nazi Party became Germany's largest in parliament, helping propel him toward the chancellorship in January 1933. Che Ma, born in China in 1838, became a celebrated sideshow performer after arriving in the United States in 1881. Standing under 30 inches tall, he reportedly spoke 5 languages, worked with Barnum and Bailey, and later became a respected figure in Knox, Indiana. In spring 1969, photographer Terry O'Neill captured Sharon Tate in London holding a Humpty Dumpty doll she had bought at Fortnum and Mason for her unborn son. The image became especially poignant because Tate and her child were killed only months later in August 1969 in Los Angeles. In May 1936, the last known living thylacine was photographed at Hobart Zoo in Tasmania, already thin and unwell. 4 months later, it died in captivity, and with no confirmed survivors ever found, the species became one of the 20th century's most haunting recorded extinctions. On July 24, 1997, record-breaking distance runner Amy Roe Bechtel vanished while scouting a race route in Wyoming's Wind River Range. Her car was found near the trailhead, but despite massive searches, no confirmed trace of the 24-year-old has ever been found to this day. In 1931, Amelia Earhart posed as one of the world's most famous aviators, a year before becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. Her record-breaking flights made her an international icon, while her 1937 disappearance turned her final journey into an enduring mystery. At 7:33 a.m. on July 10, 1962, Britain detonated the 1-megaton Sunset thermonuclear device over Christmas Island at an altitude of about 1,500 meters. The blast produced a towering mushroom cloud, making it one of the largest tests in Operation Dominic's Pacific series that summer. In 1944, an American A-20 Havoc attacked a Japanese airfield on Buru Island with parachute-retarded fragmentation bombs. The small parachute slowed each bomb after release, allowing the aircraft to escape its own blast while making fast, low-level passes over the target below safely. During the First World War, Benito Mussolini served as a corporal in the 11th Bersaglieri Regiment of the Italian Army. Wounded by a mortar explosion in 1917, he left the front years before rising from socialist journalist to fascist dictator and ruling Italy for 2 decades. On February 20, 1939, mounted police struggled with an anti-Nazi protester outside the German-American Bund rally at Madison Square Garden. Inside, more than 20,000 supporters gathered beneath swastikas, while thousands of opponents protested across New York. In 1949, 15-year-old Sofia Villani Schiccolone entered her first beauty contest in Naples, years before the world knew her as Sophia Loren. Her striking appearance opened the door to modeling and film, beginning the rise of one of Italy's most celebrated screen legends. In the early 1930s, Bette Davis and Joan Blondell posed beside a large directional microphone on a Southern California beach. Both were rising Warner Brothers stars, and the unusual setup captures how studios blended glamorous publicity with the rapidly evolving technology of early sound cinema. In 1940, actress Hedy Lamarr was also developing ideas far beyond Hollywood. With composer George Antheil, she later patented a frequency hopping system designed to guide torpedoes securely, a concept that helped shape later spread-spectrum communication technologies used today. This rare 1920 photograph is believed to show Adolf Hitler in a Munich crowd before his later image became recognizable. Taken during the Nazi movement's earliest years, it captures him without the tightly styled mustache and carefully staged public persona he adopted soon afterward. On April 24, 1917, British troops watched St. Quentin from a front-line trench along the Amiens Road, with the heavily fortified Hindenburg Line only 2 miles away. The city remained beyond Allied reach for another 17 months and was not entered by troops until October 1, 1918. In 1913, mounted special constables known as Massey's Cossacks rode through Wellington during New Zealand's Great Strike. Recruited largely from rural districts, they confronted striking workers and helped the government reopen the waterfront, deepening one of the country's fiercest labor disputes. During filming of Saving Private Ryan in 1997, the special effects crew posed among ruined sets built to recreate wartime France. Steven Spielberg, seen at the lower right, reportedly joined the photograph at the last moment while passing the group beside a prop cannon after checking the set. During filming of Saving Private Ryan in 1997, the special effects crew posed among ruined sets built to recreate wartime France. Steven Spielberg, seen at the lower right, reportedly stepped into the photograph at the last moment while passing the group beside a large prop cannon. On July 19, 1944, a British Bofors anti-aircraft crew marked 3 confirmed kills on their gun while posing with an unlikely companion, a goat. The relaxed scene captures the dark humor and moments of normality soldiers created around a weapon built to defend them from enemy aircraft. On September 30, 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain shook hands with Adolf Hitler after signing the Munich Agreement. Britain and France accepted Germany's annexation of the Sudetenland, sacrificing Czechoslovakia's defenses in a failed attempt to avoid a war in Europe. In the early 1960s, President John F. Kennedy shared a quiet moment with his young son, John Jr., away from the formality of public life. John Jr. later became a lawyer and magazine publisher before dying in a plane crash off Martha's Vineyard on July 16, 1999, at age 38. During a 1944 shuttle bombing mission through the Soviet Union, an American B-17 crew posed after Soviet ground crews painted Polyarnaya Zvezda, or Polar Star, on its nose. The artwork marked a rare moment of wartime cooperation between American and Soviet forces. In 1938, a woman in Richmond, Virginia, protested low wages while her employer owned 77 houses, yet workers could not afford rent. Her sign exposed the sharp divide between property-owning bosses and laborers struggling daily through the final years of the Great Depression. In 1949, nearly 80-year-old Henri Matisse, confined to bed after cancer surgery, used charcoal fixed to a long bamboo pole to draw chapel designs on his bedroom wall. The room matched the future chapel of the Rosary in Vence, at full scale, letting him plan his final masterpiece. Between 1895 and 1913, a decorated cycling champion posed with his racing bicycle in St. Petersburg for photographer Karl Bulla. His medal-covered jersey reflects the rise of competitive cycling in Imperial Russia, when clubs, velodromes, and public races drew large crowds. In May 1958, heaps of British tanks, trucks, and armored vehicles still filled a Hamburg scrapyard 13 years after the war ended. Once used in the Allied advance into Germany, the machines were now stacked like metal ruins, waiting to be cut apart and recycled. In 1895, miners at Colorado's Hubert Mine descended about 850 feet underground in narrow metal buckets suspended by cables. With little protection and no modern elevators, each shift began and ended with a cramped ride through darkness before the dangerous work even started far below. On January 4, 1967, Red Guards in China publicly humiliated suspected enemies of Mao during the Cultural Revolution. Student groups were empowered to search homes, demand quotations from Mao's Little Red Book, and persecute teachers, officials, and civilians across the country. In 1956, Hungarian children burned Soviet books and propaganda on Váci Street in Budapest during the anti-communist uprising. The bonfire symbolized open defiance of Moscow's control days before Soviet tanks returned, crushed the revolt, and forced thousands to flee Hungary in fear. In 1991, former model Omaima Nelson was arrested in California after killing her husband, William Nelson, during a violent domestic dispute. She claimed years of abuse and self-defense, but a jury rejected her account and convicted her of second-degree murder in 1993. In 1916, a schoolboy in Reims, France, walked to class wearing protective goggles and a cloth mask against wartime gas attacks. The strange equipment turned an ordinary journey to school into a daily reminder that civilians lived only a short distance from the nearby Western Front. In 1991, camels crossed the Iraqi desert beneath smoke from oil wells set ablaze during the Gulf War. Hundreds of fires burned for months, darkening the sky, poisoning the air, and turning the landscape into one of the conflict's unforgettable environmental disasters in modern history. In 1930, Soviet officials confiscated grain, livestock, and property from peasants labeled kulaks during forced collectivization. Families were stripped of their homes, deported to remote regions, or sent to labor camps as Stalin's campaign destroyed traditional village life. In May 1966, cranes lifted a colossal fragment of Ramesses II during the rescue of Abu Simbel in Egypt. Engineers cut the ancient temples into massive blocks and rebuilt them on higher ground, saving them from the rising waters of Lake Nasser after construction of the Aswan High Dam. In 1939, Adolf Hitler inspected a motorcycle wheel at the International Motor Show in Berlin, an event used to showcase German engineering and industrial power. The exhibition formed part of the regime's wider effort to present technological progress as proof of national strength. In 1940, Paris typists competed while blindfolded, proving they could operate complex mechanical typewriters entirely by touch. Judges measured speed and accuracy as contestants relied on memorized keyboard layouts, turning an everyday office skill into a demanding public spectacle. In January 1976, Palestinian civilians fled Beirut's Karantina district as Christian Phalangist forces overran the area during Lebanon's civil war. The attack destroyed much of the neighborhood and killed hundreds, becoming one of the conflict's earliest mass atrocities. On June 16, 1944, American B-24 Liberators bombed Bratislava, targeting the Apollo oil refinery and nearby industrial facilities. The raid caused heavy damage and fires across the city, while anti-aircraft bursts surrounded the bombers as they crossed occupied Slovakia far below them. In 1994, a Yemeni government soldier stood on a tank beneath a framed portrait of President Ali Abdullah Saleh during the Civil War. The conflict erupted after southern leaders tried to break away, but northern forces captured Aden and reunified control within 2 months of fighting. Around 1920, Jeff Davis became an American sideshow performer, often appearing in animal costumes and reportedly climbing with remarkable skill. Little is known about his life, but he worked for several seasons with Jay Warner's Diamond Amusement Company before his death in 1931. This photograph, long presented as Hiroshima's atomic mushroom cloud, was likely taken more than 3 hours after the bombing on August 6, 1945. Many experts now believe it shows smoke from the citywide firestorm, since the original blast cloud would have already dispersed by then. In October 1954, Dorothy Langore introduced 3-day-old Douglas to his 8 older brothers inside their Detroit home. The remarkable family portrait captures 9 sons meeting the newest child, with the boys lined up by age as their mother holds the baby for the first time together. During the German occupation of France, this Peugeot 202 was adapted to run on natural gas because gasoline was scarce and tightly rationed. Cylinders mounted on the rooftop supplied the engine, turning an ordinary family car into a practical wartime solution to severe fuel shortages. In 1920, a Norman Thompson flying boat lost control during an air show in Japan, diving steeply as a massive crowd watched from the ground. The photograph freezes the aircraft moments before impact, capturing the extreme danger of public aviation displays in the early years of flight. In 1891, crowds parted as a barn circus elephant was led down Atlantic Street in Brooklyn, towering over children, workers, and passing traffic. Before transport trucks became common, circuses often moved elephants through city streets between rail yards, arenas, and parade grounds. In 1923, Alma Cummings won a dance marathon at New York's Audubon Ballroom by staying on her feet for 27 hours and using 6 partners. Such contests soon became so extreme that several cities banned them after contestants collapsed from exhaustion. Sunlight pours through the tall windows of a wartime hospital dining hall as patients, nurses, and staff share a quiet meal. The peaceful scene captures a rare pause from treatment, with long tables, simple food, and bright flowers bringing dignity and calm to daily recovery inside. On October 9, 1975, Portuguese soldiers waited at Luanda Airport for flights home as Portugal ended 13 years of war in Angola. Around 500 troops were leaving each day, marking the collapse of colonial rule just weeks before Angola declared independence from Lisbon. On February 27, 1945, Marine Sergeant Leonard Shoemaker used a flamethrower to clear fortified Japanese caves during operations on Iwo Jima. Hidden positions inside the volcanic rock made the island's fighting especially dangerous, forcing Marines to attack at extremely close range. In 1912, auto polo replaced horses with stripped-down cars as players swung mallets at a ball while racing across fields and arenas. Invented as a Model T publicity stunt, the sport drew huge crowds but faded by the late 1920s after crashes, injuries, and mounting vehicle damage. Around 1990, a young Kim Jong-un was photographed riding beside one of his earliest teachers in North Korea. The carefully staged classroom image offers a rare glimpse of his childhood, decades before he inherited power and became North Korea's third hereditary leader decades later. In 1936, the Old Believer Lykov family fled Stalinist repression and vanished into the Siberian taiga, surviving without contact with outsiders. Soviet geologists found them accidentally in 1978, after 42 years of isolation, living hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement. In 1990, engineer Georgy Reichtman measured radiation levels 44 meters beneath the Chernobyl disaster site while wearing protective gear. Igor Kostin's photograph records the liquidators who entered contaminated areas to assess damage and help contain the remains of Reactor 4. On November 3, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Laika aboard Sputnik 2, making her the first animal to orbit Earth. The mission had no recovery plan, and she died within hours from overheating and stress, though Soviet officials concealed the truth for decades after the flight in 2002. In 1984, Ed Gain was photographed at Mendota Mental Health Institute in Wisconsin, where he had been confined since 1957. Found unfit for trial after crimes that inspired several fictional killers, he spent his final decades in psychiatric care and died there in 1984 at age 77 in all. In September 1974, Valerie Banks sat alone in her Boston geography class on the first day of court-ordered busing to desegregate public schools. She was the only student who appeared, a stark image of the resistance and turmoil surrounding the city's integration crisis that autumn. In September 1971, inmates at Attica Correctional Facility in New York raised their fists during a 4-day uprising over brutal conditions and basic rights. The standoff ended when state police retook the prison, leaving 43 people dead, including prisoners and hostages in the assault. On April 29, 1975, a helicopter evacuated CIA personnel and South Vietnamese contacts from a rooftop at 22 Gia Long Street in Saigon. The dramatic airlift unfolded as North Vietnamese forces closed in, just one day before the city fell and the long Vietnam War reached its final end. In 1994, graves filled the snow-covered grounds beside Sarajevo's Zetra Olympic Hall as the city endured a brutal siege. Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs were buried together there because normal cemeteries had become too dangerous to reach under constant shelling and sniper fire. On February 22, 1962, U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy and West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt examined the fortified Berlin Wall. Built only 6 months earlier, its concrete, barbed wire, and armed guards had already divided families and turned the city into a global Cold War symbol. On November 11, 1918, thousands packed the streets of Antwerp within hours of the armistice announcement, celebrating the end of 4 years of occupation and war. The sea of bowler hats, flags, and stunned faces captures the instant relief finally reached the Belgian city that morning. In 1917, suffragists known as the Silent Sentinels stood outside the White House demanding that President Woodrow Wilson support women's voting rights. Their daily protests continued through arrests, prison abuse, and public attacks until the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. On September 11, 2001, photojournalist Bill Biggert captured this final image near the shattered World Trade Center as smoke swallowed Lower Manhattan. He was killed minutes later when the North Tower collapsed, and his camera was recovered from the rubble 4 days afterward nearby. On May 21, 1979, protesters attacked San Francisco City Hall after Dan White received a voluntary manslaughter verdict for killing Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone. The White Night riots exposed public fury over a sentence viewed as far too lenient for 2 political assassinations. On May 23, 1934, a lawman posed beside the bullet-riddled Ford in which Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were killed near Gibbsland, Louisiana. 6 officers ambushed the pair, firing more than 100 rounds and ending their notorious 2-year crime spree within seconds. In 1943, Congressman Andrew J. May publicly revealed that Japanese depth charges were exploding too shallow to destroy many American submarines. After Japan adjusted their settings, the disclosure was later blamed for the loss of several submarines and hundreds of sailors in the Pacific. Inside its vast hangar in the late 1920s, workers assembled Britain's R-100 airship around a lightweight metal frame nearly 220 meters long. Completed in 1929, the giant later crossed the Atlantic to Canada before Britain abandoned rigid airships after the R-101 disaster. On March 8, 1951, Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck, known as the Lonely Hearts Killers, were executed at Sing Sing Prison. The pair had used newspaper personal ads to target lonely women, gaining their trust before robbing them and committing a series of crimes in the late 1940s. In July 1944, U.S. Marines inspected the wreck of a Japanese H-8K flying boat on Saipan after fierce fighting for the island. The massive aircraft, once used for long-range patrols, lay torn apart and riddled with holes as American forces secured the Marianas and moved closer to Japan. In 1978, a reporter writing Mary Dofour's obituary uncovered evidence that she was really Anna Merle Sizer, a woman missing from public life for decades. The discovery forced her family to face that she had spent nearly 50 years confined in institutions for the criminally insane. In 1992, Georgian soldiers in Sukhumi posed beside a toppled bust of Lenin during the war in Abkhazia. The image captures both the collapse of Soviet authority and the rise of a brutal separatist conflict that displaced hundreds of thousands across the region and devastated Sukhumi. In 1890, a locomotive in Concord, New Hampshire, overshot the massive turntable used to reverse trains bound for Boston, Montreal, and beyond. Its front wheels hung above the pit, leaving crews to recover tons of machinery after one small mistake brought the whole rail yard to a halt. On July 20, 1969, Stephen and Viola Armstrong watched their son Neil step onto the moon from their Ohio home. Viola covered her face as the broadcast unfolded, while Stephen leaned closer, witnessing their child become the first human to walk on another world before millions. In 1911, Jacques-Henri Lartigue photographed his brother Zissou floating at Château de Rouzat in a homemade boat built from a large tire. The playful scene reflects Lartigue's fascination with motion and eccentric inventions, later influencing filmmaker Wes Anderson's visual style. In September 1979, two East German families escaped in a homemade hot air balloon built from fabric, a stove, and improvised controls. 8 people endured a freezing 28-minute flight in an open metal basket before landing safely about 6 miles inside West Germany after midnight. Around 1903, chained prisoners in Florida were leased to private companies to cut timber under armed control. After slavery ended, Southern states used arrests, harsh sentences, and convict leasing to force many Black Americans into unpaid labor that generated huge profits for years. In the late 19th century, a London pest exterminator posed in the East End with a sign claiming he killed thousands of rats, bugs, fleas, and other vermin nightly. Surrounded by curious children, he turned one of Victorian London's grimmest necessities into bold street advertising. In January 1980, Paul McCartney was arrested at Tokyo's Narita Airport after customs officers found marijuana in his luggage. He spent 9 days in detention, forcing Wings to cancel its entire Japanese tour before authorities released and deported him without holding a trial there. On December 21, 1988, a bomb destroyed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, scattering wreckage across the town. All 259 people aboard and 11 residents on the ground died, making it the deadliest terrorist attack ever carried out in the United Kingdom. In 1943, 21-year-old Sophie Scholl was arrested after distributing anti-Nazi leaflets at the University of Munich with her brother Hans. A Gestapo mugshot recorded her final days before both were convicted of treason and executed by guillotine on February 22nd after a brief trial. On December 10, 1967, singer Otis Redding and 4 members of the Bar-Kays died when their plane crashed into Lake Monona near Madison, Wisconsin. Just 3 days earlier, Redding had recorded "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay," which became his first #1 hit after his death in 1968. In 1995, Jonathan Schmitz appeared in court after killing Scott Amador, who had revealed a crush on him during the Jenny Jones show. Schmitz was convicted of second-degree murder, while the case ignited a national debate over sensational television and guest safety on daytime talk shows. In July 1976, 26 California schoolchildren and their driver Ed Ray were abducted and buried inside a moving van hidden beneath a quarry. After 16 hours underground, Ray and the children stacked mattresses, forced open the roof, and escaped alive without losing a single life. In 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson visited Dwight Eisenhower at Walter Reed Hospital after the former president suffered his 7th heart attack. Despite serious illness, Eisenhower laughed with Johnson, creating a rare warm moment between two men shaped by war, power, and the presidency. In 1935, Ernest Hemingway posed aboard his fishing boat, Pilar, while aiming a Thompson submachine gun at the camera. Famous for writing about war and danger, he also kept weapons on board and later used the yacht to patrol Caribbean waters for suspected German submarines during World War II. On July 16, 1969, Jan Armstrong and her sons watched Apollo 11 rise from Cape Kennedy with Neil Armstrong aboard. Standing on a boat across the water, they saw their husband and father begin the historic mission that would place the first human footprints on the moon 4 days later. In 1926, members of Detroit's Purple Gang posed in police custody as prohibition turned bootlegging into a fortune. The predominantly Jewish syndicate became notorious for hijacking liquor shipments, extortion, armed robbery, and contract violence, dominating the city's underworld for years. On October 10, 1937, British fascist leader Oswald Mosley addressed supporters in Liverpool with his head bandaged after a brick struck him during the rally. Dock workers, trade unionists, and local residents had gathered in force, turning the event into a fierce public rejection of his movement. In 1954, a soldier photographed Marilyn Monroe entertaining American troops in Korea during a 4-day tour that included 10 shows for more than 100,000 servicemen. Wearing a simple black dress, she later called the trip one of the happiest experiences of her life and career in Hollywood. Minutes after American Airlines Flight 11 struck the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, Kazuhisa Honda photographed debris falling past the North Tower's 45th floor. The image captures the surreal calm inside the building before smoke and fire transform the morning into disaster. In December 1911, King George V's 10-day hunt in Nepal used about 12,000 attendants and elephants to drive wildlife from the jungle. The royal party killed 39 tigers, 18 rhinoceroses, and 4 bears, arranging the animals for photographs as a grim display of imperial wealth and power. In the late 19th century, doctors at Paris's Salpêtrière Hospital photographed women during so-called hysterical attacks, turning patients into medical evidence. These staged images influenced early neurology, but also exposed how female suffering was often misunderstood and controlled. In 1909, Irish acrobat P.J. Durney amazed crowds in Barry, Wales, by balancing atop a giant rolling ball as he moved through the streets. He had already completed an astonishing 150-mile journey from Dublin to Belfast on the same sphere, earning fame as the world's champion ball walker. In 1959, U.S. Navy aviator Marion Myers tested the new Mark IV pressure suit inside a wall of ice built to imitate the brutal cold of high-altitude flight. Developed by B.F. Goodrich, the suit protected pilots where thin air and freezing temperatures could become fatal within seconds. In the 1940s, conjoined twins Margaret and Mary Gibb posed in California as Margaret received a kiss from her fiancé while Mary watched beside her. Born joined at the lower spine, the sisters built careers in vaudeville and lived into adulthood without ever being surgically separated. In the early 1990s, Dennis Rader, later exposed as the BTK Killer, joined guests in the Hokey Pokey at a wedding, appearing completely ordinary. The disturbing image shows how he maintained a quiet family and community life for decades, while hiding crimes unsolved until his arrest in 2005. In September 1957, soldiers of the 101st Airborne used fixed bayonets to push back segregationists in Little Rock, Arkansas, after 9 black students entered Central High School. President Eisenhower sent federal troops to enforce integration when state authorities refused to protect them. In the 1940s, rows of early Volkswagen Beetles left Wolfsburg by rail, still carrying the famous split rear window used on the first production models. Built from a design created before the war, the compact car soon became a global symbol of Germany's post-war recovery. In August 1931, Emperor Hirohito was photographed swimming at Hayama on Japan's coast, revealing a rare private moment far from imperial ceremony. The image shows the country's ruler enjoying the sea years before his reign became inseparable from military expansion and the Second World War. In late 1917, Italy's elite Arditi of the 1st Assault Battalion trained at Strica di Manzano through smoke and live-fire exercises. Created for rapid attacks on enemy trenches, these shock troops relied on speed, grenades, and close combat to break fortified positions. On February 23, 1921, the first continuous transcontinental airmail relay reached New York after leaving San Francisco, proving mail could cross the country by air. Pilots flew day and night through winter weather, cutting delivery time from days to roughly 33 hours in one run. On February 23, 1962, President John F. Kennedy inspected the scorched Friendship 7 capsule with astronaut John Glenn after America's first crewed orbital flight. Glenn had circled Earth 3 times, instantly becoming a national hero and giving the United States a major boost in the space race. During a sortie over northern France, Canadian pilot J.M.G. Plum Plamondon opened fire from his Hawker Typhoon and caught a Junkers Ju-88 in flames. The gun camera frame freezes the German bomber in its final seconds, creating one of the most dramatic air combat images of the war. On September 30, 1955, James Dean died after his Porsche 550 Spider, nicknamed Little Bastard, collided with another car near Cholem, California. The wreckage was later displayed in safety campaigns, but stories of a curse surrounding the car turned it into one of Hollywood's darkest legends. In France during the Second World War, 2 British soldiers took cover inside a shattered building, watching the street through broken brickwork. The scene became especially haunting because the same ground had already been fought over by their father's generation during the First World War. In April 1944, Allied bombers struck Belgrade, targeting railway yards and German military facilities across the occupied city. The raids also hit residential districts, leaving hundreds of civilians dead and turning Easter weekend into one of Belgrade's darkest wartime tragedies. In 1939, a woman in labor inhaled measured anesthetic through a bedside mask while a nurse monitored her breathing and condition. The bulky machine reflects an early hospital effort to reduce childbirth pain, decades before modern epidurals and electronic fetal monitoring became routine. Soviet ground crews service an IL-2 attack aircraft fitted with powerful 37mm cannons, loading long ammunition belts into its wings. This rare variant was built to strike tanks and armored vehicles, but the heavy guns reduced accuracy and made the aircraft harder to control. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?